The 90s were a dark time for Marvel Comics. Their flagship characters, the X-Men, were turning into a giant mess of overcomplicated storylines. Spider-Man was enduring the now infamous Clone Saga, Iron Man was a teenager, Thor couldn't heal his wounds, Captain America lost his powers and had to rely on a suit of armor, and the Avengers were a team of D-listers. This, coupled with Marvel's worsening financial situation, and it was safe to say that things were looking grim for the House of Ideas. Marvel also had to deal with the separation of their lines. In the early 90s, it was decided that each book would belong to a separate kingdom. Avengers and their related books would appear in one kingdom, the X-Men titles in another, Spider-Man in another, and so on and so on. The books would rarely interact in an effort to create a universe where the titles were more independent of each other than they had been in the past. Unfortunately, the fans didn't enjoy this as much as had been anticipated. The readers clamored for a unified universe, where heroes would interact and characters could discuss the events of another book. With their heroes separated and their biggest titles in such a state of disarray, Marvel made a ballsy move. They would pull most of their heroes out of the core universe. The result was the event known as Onslaught, a big deal in the mid-90s. Event comics today are viewed as jokes for being such large, epic affairs, but at the time of Onslaught, the only events were usually crossovers between books of a similar title. An entire company-wide crossover was a rarity. Primarily an X-Men tale, Onslaught was the subconsciously created dark side of Professor Xavier and Magneto. It was a 90s X-Men comic. Don't try to put too much thought into it. At the end of the story, a large group of the heroes would seemingly die in the final battle against Onslaught, only to be secretly transported to an alternate universe created by Mr. Fantastic's son, Franklin Richards. The so-called Franklinverse, which existed inside of his blue ball, was a brand new universe where the heroes were reborn. Their origins were completely changed and their characters were redefined in 4 Heroes Reborn books. And Marvel tapped 2 of the biggest comic studios at the time to handle them, both helmed by former big-name Marvel employees from the profitable early 90s. For Fantastic Four and the Invincible Iron Man, Jim Lee and his Wildstorm Studios were hired on. But for the other 2, Captain America and the Avengers, creative control was given to Rob Liefeld and Extreme Studios. And so here we have it. Heroes Reborn, Captain America, written by Rob Liefeld and Jeff Loeb, with Liefeld doing the pencils as well. I could spend all night trying to come up with horrible things to say about this book, but we don't have to go past the cover. Just look at this mess. His head is tiny, his shoulders are huge, the shield is misshapen, and he's about 75% legs. It's typical Liefeld art. If that's not enough for you, his handiwork shines through on the plot also. Right off the bat, we have the bastardization of Cap's origin. He's not frozen in ice in Heroes Reborn. No, that origin goes to Thor for some reason. Instead, Steve Rogers is having nightmares of himself fighting in a costume in World War II. He's got a wife and a kid and works at a plant. We've also got Ricky Barnes, who becomes affectionately known to fandom as Girl Bucky. Why does she decide to call herself Bucky? There's no clues given, and the original Bucky is only mentioned in passing in the last issue, and doesn't appear to have existed in the Heroes Reborn continuity. Anyways, we meet Abe Wilson, who's the grandfather of Sam Wilson. Abe's been holding on to Cap's shield, which appears to randomly change shape and size depending on which way the characters are standing. But that's probably just Liefeld. So Abe gives the shield back to Steve Rogers. Abe is then killed by the recurring theme of this entire series, racist Nazis hell-bent on genetic cleansing. A few minutes later, Nick Fury shows up in the Rogers home and reveals that Steve's wife and kids are life model decoys. Steve has been brainwashed, kept young by the super soldier serum in his blood, and moved around every few years to avoid suspicion. Aboard the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, we learn that Cap was brainwashed because he refused to back the president's decision to drop an atomic bomb. He's given his costume back, and while we're looking at it, what's up with the eagle on the forehead? It was a pretty big point of fan contempt back then. I mean, was the giant A not good enough for Liefeld? Could he not draw an A? Anyways, Cap meets Sam Wilson at Abe's gravesite, and they're both attacked and captured by Crossbones, who works for the story's big bad, the Red Skull. Cap and Sam manage to quickly escape and run into Masterman, who looks like an evil Cable. Girl Bucky's been wandering around too, and she winds up tied to a nuclear missile. Masterman is defeated eventually, but Sam is severely wounded. So Cap cuts his hand and has him drink some of his green blood, implying the super soldier serum is either fresh-squeezed Vulcan blood or just antifreeze. The blood reinvigorates Wilson as a super soldier. The two best the Red Skull with a little help from Girl Bucky just as Nick Fury shows up, and they all smile and congratulate each other as nuclear missiles count down to launch. Shouldn't somebody turn those off? Issue 6 features Cable accidentally displaced into the Heroes Reborn universe. It's the epilogue of Industrial Revolution, a story that sets the Avengers as an independent team funded by Tony Stark as opposed to S.H.I.E.L.D. lackeys. Ironic that they've essentially used Heroes Reborn as an Ultimates ploy now, isn't it? There's not a lot I can say about this one, since it's the continuation of a story that started in a Cable issue I haven't read, other than to point out Cap's egg-shaped shield here. Ugh. Fortunately, this was Liefeld's last issue. Marvel wanted to pay the studios less for their work on the books and renegotiated the contracts. Lee was fine with it, and Liefeld refused to take less money, so Extreme Studios was out and Wildstorm took over the rest of the line. Much like in the Avengers, the new creative team took Captain America away from S.H.I.E.L.D. President Bill Clinton, inexplicably also inside the Franklin-verse, offers Cap a chance to live his life by his own rules, and the first thing he does is get rid of that eagle on his head. Yeah, even Steve prefers the big A. Issues 8 to 11 feature Captain America at his most Cap-like so far. He's touring America to get to know the country, thanks old soldiers for serving their country. He's the Cap he should have been from issue number 1. For this story, he's facing an organization called the Sons of the Serpent, who want to ethnically cleanse America. Couldn't they come up with something new for the book, or at least waited a little while before they tried this again? Anyway, the Sons of the Serpent's leader, the Serpent King, is revealed to be Nick Fury. But Nick Fury isn't really Nick Fury. He's a Nick Fury life model decoy. The real Nick Fury shows up and insists he's not nearly the dick we've been led to believe, and he wanted Steve Rogers to live his own life and doesn't know who is in charge of the order to bring him back as Captain America. Issue 12 is another line-wide crossover with Galactus showing up to eat Earth. The stories all take place in the same space of time, but at the end of the previous issues, when the heroes failed, Dr. Doom went back in time to tell the heroes how they failed, aiming to take over Earth himself when they were too weak to fight back afterwards. It's a really cool idea, and it's a shame that it took this long to come up with something that good. Nick Fury returns at the end and tells Cap that what he was told about his origin may not have been entirely true, to which Cap says he knew all along. So what was the true origin? Why didn't Cap say something before? Who gave the order to bring Steve Rogers back as Captain America? Who could possibly be bigger than S.H.I.E.L.D. and create this much chaos? We never find out. The books technically end with issue number 12. There was an issue 13 that was another line-wide crossover, this time also including Wildstorm characters, but the main story of the books ends here. So as you can tell, Heroes Reborn was a pretty horrible experiment. So why devote this much time to it? Because it's nonetheless a very important part of Marvel history. As I mentioned before, the Marvel Universe was beginning to flounder before Heroes Reborn. When the characters returned to their core universe, they were rebooted into brand new titles with new number ones. The books were given top-notch creative teams and once again occupied a universally joined Marvel, and the fan response was insane. The books sold like hotcakes then, and they still do today. And Captain America? Steve Rogers may be dead, but his death garnered national headlines, and his recently announced return to life is generating just as much buzz. Heroes Reborn was an experiment that didn't necessarily succeed, but without it, the Marvel Universe as we know it wouldn't exist, and many of these books likely would have been cancelled or never existed at all. Despite some dodgy art and repeated or dropped story elements, it's still an important part of the Marvel history that everyone needs to read at least once. The 12-issue stories were recently re-released by Marvel in trade to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the story, so be sure to check them out if you get the chance.
When Captain America throws his mighty shield, all those who chose to oppose his shield must yield.